everyone. Buenas noches. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching this live, we are thrilled that you have chosen to spend a little bit of time. If you are watching this at your own leisure, then great. Thank you for taking the time. This evening's panel webinar is to really highlight the experiences of alums of color who went back to teach in independent schools after graduating. And so we are joined this evening by two panelists, and I have also graduated and am an alum of an independent school, and come July, will be returning to an independent school. So I'm thrilled to both be moderator and panelist this evening. In just a moment, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about where they work, for how long, what type of school is it, and to just share a little bit about the highlights of their experience as an independent school student. In advance of that, while they're getting their thoughts together, I do want to remind everybody the NYSAIS Job Fair to promote diversity is scheduled for this Saturday, February 24th from 10 to 1 p.m. We ask all candidates to please arrive between 9 and 9:30. There will be a 30-minute overview, last-minute Q&A, getting you ready to go upstairs into the two spaces and meet with our school representatives and network for the period of time that is best for you between 10 and 1 p.m. If you have not pre-registered, the candidates have been live to schools since Monday. And so I again ask you, I'm not sure what you're waiting for. Consider this your personal invitation. Please, please pre-register so that your materials will be available to schools on the candidate database. And with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will then, and each one will speak a little bit about their journey, where they graduated from, where they currently work, and a few highlights of their experience as independent school students. So Tiffany, Darian, and then I'll respond.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Liz. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Hooper. I work at the Dalton School. This is my second year there. I'm also a Poly Prep alum. Go Blue Devils. And prior to Dalton, I've worked at UNIS, United Nations International School, Loomis Chaffee in Connecticut, and Brooklyn Friends in Brooklyn. So I love working in independent schools. I love education. I appreciate the missions of all the schools that I've worked in. And I think having come from an independent school, particularly as a student on scholarship, that gives me some information that is helpful as I navigate the independent school world professionally. So thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Darian Crute. I currently work at Rye Country Day School, which is a day school in Rye, New York. Previously, before that, I worked at Philston in Riverdale. That's actually where I started my teaching career. I also worked at Avon Old Farm School in Avon, Connecticut, a boarding school, all boys boarding school, and then a day school in Miami called Palmer Trinity School before coming to Rye. I too enjoy working at independent schools. In fact, it's the only type of school that I've worked at since I've started my teaching career. And before that, I worked as a software test developer and engineer for Fujifilm Medical. And then I transitioned to be a teacher while I was getting my master's degree.
Thanks, Tiffany and Darian. So I'm Liz Fernandez. In addition to coordinating the job fair, I graduated from the Notre Dame School in New York. Prior to graduating, I only attended for 1 year. I went to the American School of Santo Domingo in Dominican Republic, so an international day school. I have worked at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School, the Dalton School, and beginning in July, I will be the upper school head of the upper school learning community at Brooklyn Friends School. And for me, I certainly agree with what our panelists have said in terms of really appreciating the experience of working in schools. I've also spent a great deal of time and have consulted at over 100 schools, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And what I really appreciate that seems to be a theme, no matter how similar or different in most cases schools are, is a real love and passion that educators have for the work that they do. They are seemingly unencumbered by a level of bureaucracy that I think we see in other kinds of schools. I definitely see our colleagues just really passionate about what they do and to have the autonomy to lead and teach and work and partner with one another to really serve kids and to serve the mission of the school has continuously been really inspiring for me. So I wanted to just say that there are many, many alums within schools, whether they are alums of a school and then they're teaching at that same school, or they are alums and have moved on, like both Tiffany and Darian. Um, but either way, there's something about the experiences that we have that keeps us and that has helped us to choose education as our career path. And so I was wondering if you both could share a little bit about the highlights that you had as an independent school student, thinking back and reflecting on some of the key exchanges or moments that you cherish. You can certainly think about this from the perspective of a classroom example, maybe an example of a co-curricular experience that you had, and then an example of an experience that you had, um, athletically in the performing arts spaces and the visual arts spaces. So just sort of giving us a more well-rounded experience. Darian, why don't you kick us off, and then I'll go second, and Tiffany, you'll come up at the end.
Certainly. So I'm actually sitting here thinking right now about some of those moments. So I went to a boarding school. I went to Canterbury School in New Milford, Connecticut. I was there for 4 years. It is only a 9 through 12 school, including PGs. And I will say one of the things that I enjoyed there the most, and one of my highlights, was being in the plays. When I was in high school, I did every play that the school had: a fall Shakespeare, a Shakespeare in the fall, and a musical in the spring every year. Um, and I still talk to a lot of my fellow thespians who were with me. I visit them often. We hang out often. So I cherish those connections and that bond that we had. I was also a varsity athlete. I played football and lacrosse. I tried almost every sport while I was at the boarding school, including water polo, which I had never even heard of until I played my third form year as a ninth grader. And that was a different experience because I've been in pools my whole life, but I never played water polo. And water polo is not exactly swimming. It's more like swimming and soccer and rugby rolled into one. And I found that out really quickly. And yeah, and then I switched to football the following fall. Um, but I did try like a ton of sports, and I liked having that ability to try a lot of sports. Because coming from a school in the city, I did not have that ability. I mostly played basketball and or baseball for the most part growing up, until I went to Canterbury. And then kind of like a classroom, I really enjoyed like especially my senior year English electives. I took British literature my fall of senior year, and then I took American drama in the spring of senior year. And American drama really stuck with me the most. I mostly took those two courses because of the teacher that taught them. Like I really connected with her in previous moments throughout the previous year, my junior year. And American drama was super fun. I really like we not only the books that we read, but also the writing that we did. That was also where I started like really getting into my creative writing. Because final project was that we had to write American style drama of our own. and I still fiddle with it today. And maybe one day I'll publish it as a short story. I don't know. But I mean, those are kind of like the highlights that I truly enjoyed from each of those areas.
Thanks, Darian. I had no idea that you were a thespian. Like, wow, very cool. So for me, going to school in a different country where rather than snow days, you have hurricane and cyclone days, um, was a totally different experience. I really appreciated the exposure that I got to both my parents' culture, um, understanding sort of context of why were we living this duality of existence in the United States for a little bit and now in Dominican Republic. So that was a really great experience for me. I appreciated the relationships that I was able to develop. It was a small school. There were 700 kids, um, 2-year-olds to 12th graders. There were 24 kids, somewhere between 24 and 28 kids, most of my time in Dominican Republic. And there were 3 things that I tried. Um, there wasn't a whole lot of options, but there were definitely 3 things that were really important to me. One, I was a competitive volleyball player, and loved it, and loved playing volleyball year round, um, and really appreciated both playing in our independent school league, but also playing against the local Dominican league. Um, and their style of volleyball was, I'm like, they really made us play to their level. And that was amazing for me. I loved it. Um, I, like you, Darian, tried out for the play. And that was my sophomore year. And all of my friends, we all decided we were going to do the play together. And it was a play written by the director, who then became our junior year, our US history teacher. And she was just such an inspiration. Really, just so amazing. Thank goodness Facebook allows us to stay connected if you want, because I really appreciate being connected to her. And I loved being in the play for that one year. And then the other experience that I had that I think was pretty consistent, including when I transferred and came to school in New York, uh, is um, I uh, I ended up doing yearbook for 4 years. And that's really special because as I sit here in my home office, I'm looking at the 4 yearbooks that in high school are now archived as something that I worked on with people that mattered, that were important to me and that cared as much as I did about having memories. Um, so I'm grateful for those experiences. I'm really in this nostalgic place, and I'm appreciating just having that moment. Tiffany, how about you?
Unmute myself. Apologies if you all heard my children trying to break into the room. Their father quickly got them. So in terms of my experience, so prior to enrolling at Poly, I had been in Catholic school for 8 years. And so I had no idea of how independent schools might differ in any regard, and in terms of sort of faith-based schools versus independent schools, and there are some overlaps there. And so, I went from wearing a uniform every day, and, everything was sort of in a particular order and structure, to being asked big questions about how to think, and, exploring different questions and different topics. The notion of a liberal arts education wasn't something that was even on my radar. I participated in sports at Poly, but I wasn't particularly good. I think the hope was that because I'm tall, I was going to be good at basketball, but that was not the case. But I had a wonderful experience nonetheless, in all of the various affinity spaces. So Poly, when I was there, had a big prep for prep contingent. I'm not in prep for prep, but definitely a fan, and many of my friends are. I was on scholarship. And so being able to connect with other students of color, other students who are on financial aid, other students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, was a really rich and powerful experience. I think in many ways, attending Poly has laid the foundation for my ability to navigate all predominantly white institutions since then. It's almost like I'm fluent in or bilingual in code switching, and can navigate those spaces sort of fairly seamlessly. And I would say the other piece of it that I found engaging was the teachers I met, learning about what schools they went to and what they majored in, particularly the faculty members of color, and learning about their experience. And so that's part of why I appreciate about being an independent school employee now, staff member, is that I have the ability to connect with students who haven't encountered people like me who have gone to independent schools and sort of understand what they're going through in that particular moment. So that's been a very powerful experience. It's also interesting to see, in some ways, so many ways things have changed. In other ways, there are some challenges that remain the same, in supporting all students, but particularly students of color and students with significant financial need in independent school spaces. I also was on the yearbook. I faithfully took the R train from Bed-Stuy to Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights every Saturday. And of course, I was the only girl and the only Black girl of color on the team. And so that was different. All the other kids sort of showed up in their very nice fancy cars, and I walked from 95th Street. But nonetheless, we were having the same experience. And so yeah, I owe Polly a debt of gratitude in terms of everything that I've learned, and that how I've developed professionally, and I'm excited for to be able to pay that forward to other students.
It's amazing what you just said, Tiffany, reminds me of the expression, we're not all in the same boat. We're in a boat. Some of us are in a dinghy, some of us are in, a 50-foot yacht, some of us are on a cruise liner. And I think for me, the experiences of growing up in New York City from very humble beginnings with immigrant parents who never spoke English. I'm a Head Start alum, and as I went through public school, the idea of transferring countries and going to a different place was really amazing and, overwhelming. I'll admit it was overwhelming, but I was always up for a good adventure. What I wasn't expecting was my parents switched schools between sixth and seventh grade, between seventh and eighth, between eighth and ninth, and between 11th and 12th. And then I graduated from high school and went to college. And over that period of time, it was really the educators in my life, no matter where I was, no matter what kind of school I was in, that made an enormous difference. And so I'm curious if we could think back, as we think about sort of our time on this webinar and the ways in which, for those that are listening, just giving them some pearls of wisdom, some examples of how adults in our lives made such a significant difference for us. What would be some of the challenges that you experienced as a student where an adult was particularly helpful? If you can think back and, in any context, in any, whether they were a coach or a teacher or an advisor of a particular co-curricular activity, whatever it was, maybe they didn't even teach you. Darian, Tiffany, and then I'll end.
And Liz, I just want to jump in and say that my friend and colleague Johara Tucker is in the virtual space. So she can join as soon as we let her on the stage, so to speak. But I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And I just, Johara, thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you up in a moment. I have just pinned you, so we'll get you warmed up, and then we'll catch you up. But we're thrilled you're here and that you were available to join us. So
No problem.
So yeah, I was actually trying to think. So a few of my challenges when I was a student mostly stemmed from me being an introvert and needing to expand my social battery. And I had a very good advisor who helped me come to terms with I couldn't do everything alone. I was one of those people who group projects, presentations, things of that nature, I would basically just take the wheel and do them because I didn't want to trust other people to do them because my grade was dependent on those things, and I needed to make sure I maintained my grade so that I can stay at my boarding school. And make sure I kept all my financial aid and things of that nature. At least that was the mentality that I had at that time. And my advisor really helped me to branch out, trust people a little bit more, and as I said, expand my social battery because there's times when you just want to be alone, and I'm more of those. I want to be alone 90% of the time, and 10% of the time I can handle other folks. And then I guess another like kind of challenge was really more just the fact going back to like the bonds and connections that you made. And it wasn't even while I was a student in high school, but I went to when I first started out at college. I went to SUNY Albany. I really wanted to transfer partway through the first semester, and my high school lacrosse coach convinced me to at least finish the year and see how the year went before I really thought about transferring. And he talked to me, and then I'm glad I did because then it turned out that I truly enjoyed the rest of my college time. I joined Res Life. I found my group organizations that I want to join, and basically I found my tribe while I was there. And it was kind of a culture shock coming from a small, intimate boarding school of 360 kids to this giant university where I had 800 kids in my building. That was a culture shock, and he kind of helped me through that a little bit, the transition.
Would you like me to jump in, Liz? Okay. So I touched on this a little bit, but I think I was exposed to a greater socioeconomic spectrum than I encountered in, my neighborhood or my family. And that was helpful for me in terms of developing, as I mentioned earlier, some of those code switching skills, but also having the cultural capital to know certain references or certain places. So I remember one day on the school bus, I joked that, I'd been in Martha's Vineyard that the weekend before. And I only mentioned that name because I had heard about it on TV. And then the classmate responded, "Oh, where do you stay on the island?" And of course, I'd never been there, still haven't, and had no idea how to respond. And so being able to be comfortable with some of those socioeconomic differences and not feel ashamed or different, but to take pride in sharing that space. A lot of students experience this when college admissions decisions come out, and there's a lot of how did you get in? How did you do that? I remember there was a classmate and we were in AP European history, and she said, I had gotten to Amherst College, and she said, well, how did you do that? I'm like, well, we're in the same AP European history class. And so I think having that sense of self and confidence and exposure to different class dynamics has grounded me in a way in independent schools that I think has served me well as an adult. And prepared me for lots of different spaces in terms of some of these dynamics.
Thanks, Tiffany. Both you and Darian reminded me of one particular, I can actually isolate one series of challenges. I was very much an extrovert in high school, and I think partly because I played a sport that was like, we were a very big powerhouse in Dominican Republic. And then my senior year, I sort of became more of an introvert because it really was, it was just 1 year. But what I remember distinctly happening is that I both of these schools were fairly traditional schools, so I didn't really learn how to think critically and analytically until I think much later in life, and probably exposed to some of the schools that I've worked in or consulted for in my professional life. But I bring up school came easier to me because I loved school, and I was the kid that would, get my homework done during the school day so that I could read ahead, or so that I could go to practice and like come home, shower, and go to bed. Or I was also the kid definitely who would go to practice, have a game, and before I would go out on Friday nights, if there was a place to go out to, I would get a lot of my homework done. Like our school day ended much earlier than traditional schools do these days. So there were days where we were done by 1, there were days where we were done by 2, which meant that if we had an athletic contest, we were done by 3:30, 4 o'clock at the latest, which is when so many of our schools start their competitions or their rehearsals or whatever else. So school just came relatively easy to me in a way because I loved the learning experience, and quite frankly still do, until I hit chemistry. Chemistry is the single class that changed the trajectory of my life. It did not make sense to me. I've never thought of myself as a concrete thinker, but that was drawing on some abstract skills that just made no kind of sense to me. And I am very grateful to this day that my chemistry professor realized that I was struggling, and I was indeed struggling. And I would get to school early, over breaks, at lunch. I would sit there and I would work so hard to try to understand and make sense of the Avogadro number. I could memorize periodic table, no problem, but I couldn't make sense of some of the other concepts, or like moles and conversions and things. And it was that particular instructor, who I'm still in touch with today, who really made a difference and reminded me of what it means to work really, really hard. I mean, that B I earned, and I earned it big time. And I'm really grateful because it was a humbling experience, and it was also a teacher who really cared and realized how important it was for me to understand what I was doing. And the way that it relates to some of the work that we do now today in schools. Yes, many of our schools have learning centers, and we have learning specialists who do an extraordinary job in supporting the young people that are attending our schools. And there are countless educators across our schools who are not part of the learning center, who will meet with students, who will sit and spend time and instill that sense of confidence and belief in our students that they can write that paper, that they can, convert that equation that they can solve for, fill in the blank, that they can create something really beautiful and powerful. And so that for me is a story that really is important for me to highlight, really, because it informs much of the way that I lead and that I teach and that I coach today. So Johara, we are so grateful that you have joined us. We have had a couple of a couple of questions. So it would be great if you introduced yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you graduated from and where you currently work and in what capacity. And then tell us about some of the highlights that you experienced in your independent school as a student. Reflect on, was there something uh, in the athletic space, in the co-curricular space, in the performing arts spaces, in the visual arts spaces, sort of where were some of the highlights that you had? And then obviously now that'll catch you up to
Right.
what were some of the challenges? Is there a challenge where an adult was particularly helpful?
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Jahara Tucker. I am currently the Chief of Equity and Belonging at the Dalton School, and I've been there 2 years. I'm an alum of the Petty School in Hightstown, New Jersey, and graduated in the class of 2000. Highlights, it's interesting. I'm kind of thinking back. Most of the highlights are the times where I thought at that time I had failed. Because I walked into boarding school, independent school from a public school in Brooklyn, being at the top of my class and knowing that it would be in a different environment for me, both academically and socially, but having no idea how much it would rock my world. And the times that I'm remembering as highlights were the time where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. And so the first instance was an English class where I think I got a C, and I walked up to the teacher. I was like, I don't do C's. Like I don't. And the paper was so marked up, and I said, we need to talk. And I was so afraid to advocate for myself, but I also knew I was more afraid of my mother than afraid of the teacher and saying what I needed. And, he said, well, there was no thesis statement. I'm like, what is a thesis statement? Like, I did not know. These are things that I came from my school and did not know. And so he worked with me on that paper the entire semester until I got a B+. And he didn't have to do that. But what I think, and he's funny, he passed away a couple of years ago, but we always kept in touch. And he said, what I realized at that time, this was the first time that we really started accepting students from the inner city. And that you came in with a different skill set. And that helped me be a better teacher because all I knew was that the kids were coming for feeder schools. Of course they knew these things. And that's a highlight for me because it was a time where I thought I had failed, but actually when I think about how I approach my education, how I approach teaching, how I approach leadership is not everyone's coming from the same coming from the same foundation. And so how do we get everybody to the same place, right? And so I think about that, where he was challenging me the entire semester. I had other papers to do, but he's like, you don't do C's. So if you don't do C's, you have to keep working on this first paper. And I will always remember that. And so I think of other times, even just through sports, I thought crew was like PE, like hanging with my crew. And so I went to, and it was a group of us who thought the same thing. And we went to practice that day, just, thinking it was PE. And they're like, run a mile. And I'm like, I don't even run for the bus in Brooklyn. Like, this is not going to happen. And he was also my dorm parent. So I'm like, I'm in trouble. I'm in a lot of trouble because I just refused to do it. And he's like, you don't run? I was like, no, I don't run. And so he would start waking me up in the morning, let's go run. I'm like, can we walk? Like, so thinking I failed, but like, also he was just kind of conditioning me to try new things. Like if I'm going to walk into this new environment, to try new things and be able to realize what I like and what I don't like. And also kind of teach me the lingo, that the prep school lingo that I walked in not knowing. And so I think about those are the highlights for me, and just thinking also about faculty of color and how important they were to my formation as a student. Just also thinking about just how present they were for me, that those people are still in my life right now. And those are people that are still, I still call, like, how did you get through this? How did you get through being the only one? So those are the highlights that kind of stand out for me.
You definitely just highlighted that each school has a certain dialect, has a certain, you know, Tiffany, Martha's Vineyard, the places, the clothing, the, I didn't know that summer was anything but a season. Where are you summering? Those kinds of experiences. To this day, the first and time that I ever went skiing, and I would not call what I did skiing. I put skis on. I was working at an independent school and I put them on I was chaperoning a trip, put on skis for probably 15 minutes. And when I realized that I had to, in order to break the movement, I really had to fall. I was like, yeah, no, not for me. All good, but not for me. It's fascinating how we've learned some of the language and also how we've brought our own flavor to the spaces that we went to school and that now work. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your professional journey, and what made you return to teach at an independent school. Really interested in hearing about that. Tiffany Johara Darian.
Okay, thank you. So let's see. So as I mentioned, went to Poly and then went to Amherst College for 4 years. And yeah, again, academically, Poly provided a strong foundation for me to then be prepared for what I was going to encounter in college. And I'm grateful for that. I enjoyed working in the admissions office at Amherst. So I started off as a student worker. So I had a work-study job. I needed to earn money. And I realized that working in the admissions office, you could do your homework and get paid. Started out with that. Then I realized that there was I went from like filing in the back room when applications were paper back in the Stone Age, to learning about a diversity intern program that was run through the admissions office. And at the time, the director of, I can't remember what the title was at the time, I think it was multicultural recruitment, was Joy St. John, who is now the director of admissions at Harvard. I asked if that was something that I could join, because there was a lady in the back room who was kind of racist and I really didn't want to work with her. And she said, sure, no problem, come along. And so my role was to help with different diversity open house programs and tell other students, first generation to college, and students of color about my experience. So that led me to work in admission after I graduated from college. It was sort of a natural extension of what I was doing. So I worked in the admissions office at Amherst for 2 years. My undergraduate degree was in Black Studies and also fine art. So I wanted to pursue fine art photography. And so I went to Yale, and that was a different experience in terms of exploring what it means to be a person of color in the art world. And that was not a fit for me. And so I went back to education. Brooklyn Friends actually had a part-time position as a part-time college counselor. And I figured, well, I could earn some money and maybe still do my photography. And then college counseling was the calling, it took over. And then from there, my husband and I moved back up to Massachusetts. I worked at Loomis Chaffee. So I got to experience some of the distinctions between boarding and day schools. and had the opportunity to go back to Amherst and worked at admission. This time I focused on international admission and had the opportunity to travel to Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Europe. And so that led to me moving back to New York City to work at UNIS, United Nations International School, where I was co-director of college counseling. And I was there for 7 years. And then the opportunity came about at Dalton, and this is my second year as director of college counseling there. And I will say, having worked in different independent schools and having attended different independent schools has prepared me well for my current role, because there's nothing new under the sun. You've seen it all in different permutations at different schools at different points in your career or your adolescence. And so that makes navigating the space much more manageable. And again, also helps in identifying what some of the challenges might be for not just the students, but maybe some younger colleagues, particularly younger colleagues of color, in terms of how they navigate the dynamics that exist in these spaces.
Jahar?
Yep. So my journey, so after I graduated Petty, I went to Wesleyan University, and then I went to law school, and I went to law school at night. I went in the evening program because there were bills to be paid. And I honestly wasn't sure if I wanted to be kind of a lawyer in a firm. And so I figured, can't afford the full-time tuition, and I'm not 100% sure which path I want to go. So I went at night. So I worked full-time in the music industry with Performing Rights Organization, and I worked in the legal department there. And then I went to law school at night for 4 years. Because in my head, I was going to be an entertainment lawyer, and that was it. And I would say after the second year, I said, I still want to do entertainment or sports law, but maybe not the lawyer bit. Like, I just felt, as a Black woman, I didn't see a lot of myself there, or it was just too many compromises to be made. So I graduated from law school. And then while we were actually taking the bar exam, that's when the financial crisis happened. And so I had an offer at a law firm, and many of us were getting phone calls while we were in the bar exam that we had lost our first year jobs because firms were closing all over the place. And so I think that for me, that was a sign, because I was never really sure if I wanted to be practicing. And I said, well, I went to prep school, and I kept, while I was in school, I kept seeing a lot of alum come back and get jobs. And I figured, why not me? And so just started asking around, and it didn't work out for a while. And so I volunteered in court, and then eventually I started working with the ACLU and working in housing court. And then a call came to say, hey, Pomfret has an opening in communications, and that may be a way to just get back into schools. And so I worked in the communications department at Pomfret, working on their website, and I had some background with coding, and also with writing, because I was blogging at the time. And so just this really weird way to get in, but I was in. And so it's kind of, sometimes when you get into schools, people find your talents, or things find you. And I ended up working as a dorm parent, but I wasn't living in the dorm at that time. I started started teaching history, then eventually Black studies. And because I was doing a lot of diversity work without a title. I was also the only Black woman on that campus at that time, and it was just this default thing. But I left that school as an assistant dean of community life, because I went for a position actually that I knew I was not going to get, but I felt that they had forgot that I had a law degree. They forgot that I had this skill. And so the position wasn't even, it was created literally the same time they announced the dean position. And so I got into administration that way. That actually helped then propel me into another school where I became the director of social justice. And I was at that school for 4 years, really formulating their social justice program, creating a social justice graduation requirement, which really got me into the curriculum piece of this work, doing loads of trips for students, international trips, as well as domestic trips that really centered around issues of social justice, and just stayed in the New England boarding school area for about maybe 11 years. And then decided to take an opportunity out on the West Coast as the director of equity and belonging. And it was a challenge for me, one, because I had never, the work on the West Coast of DEI, the regions kind of handle it very differently. And I was really excited about that opportunity. But that's also my first summer was the summer of George Floyd. And that was really hard to do that work in a different region and do it when we could not be together physically. So I did the work there, stayed there for 3 years, and then started looking to come back east to do the same work. And the opportunity for Dalton came, and I just took it. One, I knew it would be challenging work, but I also knew it would be back in my hometown of New York City. So I've been doing the DEI space for 15 years and loved every minute of it. And some people like, well, do you miss practicing law? Not at all. And I'm able to bring my legal degree into the decisions that I have to make, the policies that I have to write, the way that I think about this work, because there's so much nuance in DEI work that my law degree helps me every single day. So I have no regrets besides the student loans, because it really hones in the work that I do and takes me to a different level because I have that background. So that's my trajectory. It's kind of wonky, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
All right. And so it's funny, I was actually just telling this story the other day about how I started teaching, and I always start out the same exact way. I kind of fell into teaching. So after I graduated from the University at Albany, I started my own consulting business, doing IT consulting and technology consulting. So pretty much anything on the computer that you needed done, I would do, whether it was setting up a home network or building you a website or setting up a database, making an application, whatever you needed done, I handled it. But it wasn't really working out too well. I was living at home, and so then I got a job and decided I wanted to go back to school. And I applied to Iona for a master's degree in computer science. And that was also right when I started working at Fujifilm Medical. And then around May, we found out, or actually it's probably more like April, we found out that they wanted to relocate our team to North Carolina. And I said, I'm currently getting a degree that I just took out more student loans to help pay for. So that's not going to work for me. And then a position opened up at Philston. I had to started looking at possibly looking at independent schools because I knew like public schools didn't have computer science teachers, or at least not like a license that I could just go in to teach at a public school. So I started really looking at independent schools and local independent schools in the area, and stumbled across the Philston opening and got hired over the summer. And then I started the following fall. And my goal was to just teach until I finished my degree and then go back to where, as I tell the kids, the money is, because you can obviously make a ton more money as a software developer these days than you can as a teacher, which kids remind me of now on a regular basis. But then something happened after like my first year while I was waiting to finish up my degree, and I kind of fell in love with teaching. It was partly the school, it was my co-workers like Liz, and all those things that just made me love teaching. And then I also noticed that there was a big gap between what most kids were learning in computer science in schools and what their expectation was in colleges around computer science. And I was like, well, I could help bridge that gap, even if it's only to a handful of kids who are interested in taking it. And I could basically be the equivalent of the Mr. Rolfe, which was the computer science teacher at Canterbury, where I was at. And then once I decided to take teaching more seriously. I'm really focused on teaching. I then decided that I want to get experience at other schools and see what other independent schools were like. And so I left Philston and went to Avon Old Farms and was there for a year, all boys boarding school. So after I did 3 years at Philston, I went to Avon, did 1 year. It was not exactly the right fit for my personality and what I wanted and things of that nature. And then I left after 1 year and I went to Palmer, was there for 3 years, really enjoyed it, different experience down in Miami. Kids often ask me now, why did I move back from Miami? And I was like, well, I'm a New Yorker at heart, and Miami is a different vibe. It's a cool vibe, but it's not the northeastern vibe that I truly enjoy. And then I came back 4 years ago. This is my 4th year at Rye. And I started teaching at Rye. It was opening, and then our department chair was stepping down, and then I stepped into the department chair role. And I've been a department chair now. This is my 3rd year, and that's kind of where the journey was. So, I mean, it's a little bit straighter than some, but it's still, I came from a different area, different field. And kids often ask me, do I continue to teach? And I said, are you trying to get rid of me? Like, I enjoy y'all. There's still a lot for you to learn. And plus, if I stay here, then when y'all come back and you can share all your stories, I can live my life through your stories as developers.
I
So.
love the 3 different journeys that you all just shared. I will say that no matter how people come to schools, I think there's a couple of takeaways. And I just want to highlight them for our listening audience while you all think about the question that I just sent you all in the text, in the chat that came up. It's not a linear path. There's always opportunities where one door closes, another opens, that is for sure. And there are different vibes that happen regionally in our schools, day, boarding, and regional locations. And they're, through persistence, the one thing that will stay the same is kids will always be amazing. Kids will always be excited about connecting with you, and I would hope they'll always bring out the very best in you, for sure. So the final question is really kind of a combination of questions that some of our listening audience that's watching this live has posed to the panel. And that's really, how do you reconcile any negative or uncomfortable experiences you had as an independent school alum, both as a leader and teacher working in a school? Is there an impact is there an impact of those experiences and how you currently show up? That's sort of the general question, and it really is a mishmash. We have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask each of you to think about that and to succinctly respond to that question. Johara, let's start with you. And then go to Darian and then Tiffany, and then I'll close this out and remind everybody about the job fair. So, there you go.
Yeah. I'll keep it super brief. I think the way I reconcile is by constantly reminding myself in these spaces that I'm a product of these schools. I am a successful product of these schools. And so my alumni dollars count. And so I authentically show up because the kids at my alma mater deserve to see an alum of color who's being authentic and who she is and what she does. They deserve to see that it's possible. They deserve to see that they can do that as well. And the way that I show up in my work is in the same way, that I am a product of this, right? And that it's not a monolith. We can show up any way that we want to and still be successful and still have the education. And so that's how I reconcile what I've been through, is by being authentically who I am now and daring you to tell me any different.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything Jahara just said. And I will just add that one of the thinking back to like negative moments, because there were some when I was in school, but the good moments far outweigh the bad moments and the negative moments and the things. And as a teacher now, and thinking back and reflecting, like I look at those moments that were negative as good learning opportunities, because when I see that type of thing happen at school as an educator, I think I handle it in a better way, or can address it in a better way, because I can speak from the I perspective and say, like, if this was me, like something similar happened and this is how it made me feel. And so we should try to be better about how we handle certain things. But and it just helps me be a better, more authentic self. And again, I look at it as like, again, I am a product of Canterbury. I'm a saint. I bleed blue. And so everything that I do, not only does it reflect on my family, it reflects on my high school upbringing, it reflects on my college years as well, because those were formative years. And so I just know that I want to present the best version of myself so that other people can see.
I agree with everything that has been said. I think one thing that I've learned in independent schools, I became too good at becoming a chameleon and adapting to different environments. And so it took a lot of maturity and therapy to get a better sense of my own authenticity and who I am and what's important, and to understand that who I am and how I grew up is just as important, if not more important, than the schools I went to. I've learned that no matter how fancy my title is, there's still cabs that pass me in the street. There's still people who think that I'm my kid's nanny. And to hold on to a sense of self in any space of knowing who I am and who I was raised by, making sure to say hello to everybody that I pass walking in the building. And so I think it has allowed me to, one, sort of find my own authenticity, but also understand some of the history and baggage and prejudice or bias that people bring to interactions with me, and being able to preempt that and know how to navigate some of those uncomfortable situations.
Thank you all so very much. Darian, Tiffany, Jahara, our time sadly has come to an end. I want to just recognize your time and really appreciate your willingness to join us and share your perspectives as independent school alums who are now employees. I also want to just remind everyone that there are many, many independent school alums that are working within our schools across the country. And certainly in the Northeast, with a concentration of independent schools, we certainly have quite a few of all identities. And each one has maybe a similar or even a different story. No matter what, each of us has an opportunity to really each day pursue a passion in working in schools and connect with colleagues, and really support the development of young people into leaders for good. And we certainly know that our world really needs leaders for good. So I invite you to pursue an opportunity at one of our member schools. As a reminder, Saturday is the job fair, and we will see you at Columbia Grammar and Prep on February 24th from 10 to 1 p.m. Please join us between 9 and 9:30 for a Q&A that will promptly start at 9:30, so that we can get you ready to network and secure those positions, because we look forward to welcoming you and possibly seeing you on a future panel. Thank you so much, friends. Best of luck to you all as you get very close to spring break. Hang in there, and thank you everyone for listening, and of course to my NYSAIS colleagues for your continuous support. Have a great evening, and till next time. Bye.